So carrying on criticising neurodiversity, so moving over to video number 2 now. So in this article I'm talking about by Freddie de Boer, he goes on to talk about a change that's taken place in rhetoric comparatively recently, where now books that talk about autism, where now we have loads and loads of books that just talk about autism as a set of valuable personality quirks rather than as a disorder. And you could read tens of thousands of words in this genre without ever once being informed about the existence of those whose autism debilitates them. It's just not the public face anymore of autism. Like, we need some sort of balance, really. And it's kind of now just gone so far to the other extreme that we've just completely lost sight of people whose autism actually does debilitate them, which is really not helpful. You're not even allowed to use that word debilitate anymore. That's on PC, just as you're not allowed to use the word disorder. So whenever I read yet another article talking about how some high-achieving computer scientists saw autism as the key to their success, I would think of those whose autism has prevented them from enjoying all the elements of human life. So yes, he's obviously talking about people whose autism is so extreme that they literally, like I said before, for people who just spend their days essentially self-injury, meltdowns, things like that. That's obviously at one extreme. I wouldn't say that. Like I'm someone in the squeeze middle, so there are still many things I enjoy, and autism hasn't prevented me from enjoying all things. Like, there are parts of my brain that are healthy, and it's not completely, what's the word for it? It's not as organically injured as someone whose autism literally stops them doing everything, and for that I'm grateful. I'm so grateful that I have at least some abilities, because I don't know what it would be like to be completely locked in. Like some people who are absolutely so profoundly autistic, they can't even speak. Like, I can speak, and I've got a good, healthy intellect, at least verbally. Non-verbally I'm screwed, but I've got a good, healthy, at least part of my brain is functioning, basically. And for that I'm thankful. But it's still, nevertheless, the autism I have, the parts of my brain that are screwed, basically that does prevent me from doing many things I wish I could do. It cuts me off from a whole chunk of human experience. I can't have meaningful relationships, I can't work. There are loads of things that my autism has stopped me from doing. And I can't ever be thankful for that. I have to accept it, but, it's not helpful when I read these people saying how autism is a gift, or how it's just a difference, when it's not. So yeah, he says it's been replaced. Instead, we have members of the thriving classes whose autism has never prevented them from flourishing at everything they've tried. So yeah, basically people who can manage a family, work at Ivy League universities, basically who've never had to rely on benefits, who essentially are very, very, very able, and yeah, of course they might have difficulties, but again, so do many people. But what I'm saying is their autism has never prevented them from flourishing at everything they've tried. These are the people who are now dominating the discourse and telling us what autism is, and it's really unhelpful. And since autism is not a disorder has become the enforced opinion, those whose autism plainly is a disorder have to be marginalised by the very people who complain about the marginalisation of neurodiversity. Somewhat ironic. So autism has been gentrified. It's become an identity marker that is useful for social positioning among the chattering class. I see this a lot on social media, by the way. The culture of that attribute has now become bent towards the interests and biases of those who enjoy the privilege of holding society's microphone. Now this is an interesting note. I can hold society's microphone to an extent. I'm sort of doing that on his YouTube channel as a minority marginal voice, and I guess I'm using my verbal ability, the part that hasn't been hit by my autism, for which I'm grateful. I'm using that to try and advocate, trying to shift the narrative a little bit. I feel I have a responsibility as someone who's highly verbal, and at least whose autism has not impacted my verbal skills, and has given me at least I do have some ability that hasn't been affected by my autism. I can use that ability to basically highlight the other side, because I sort of feel I have my foot in both camps. I'm both extremely able, but I'm also extremely disabled. I'm sort of in that middle, so I can sort of see both. I can come at it from someone who's highly verbal, and yeah, I feel I have a responsibility to do that. But that's what I want to say. So, after all, you must enjoy the privileges of communicative competence. And also have educated class signalling mechanisms, and also, of course, know how to, network and things like that. I don't have the ability to network because I'm too socially screwed for that. but I can use my YouTube as a platform at least. At least I could do that. So we will always tend towards a conversation that defaults to the interest of the least afflicted. The obvious impulse is to say that someone who faces total debilitation from their disorder should be... The obvious impulse to say that someone who faces total debilitation from disorder should be a higher priority for... I can't actually see what I read there, we'll ignore that. My handwriting's gone a bit screwed. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that people are voiceless. So for those who are more debilitated by autism are voiceless. Voices in the heads of a high functioning give them plenty of attention. And he also says that it's unhealthy to define your essence through what are essentially diseases. I personally don't think autism is a disease in a strict sense of the word, because obviously disease is something that gets progressively worse over time. Although autism in some cases actually can get progressively worse over time, so it's kind of in a blurry ground for some people. And I guess at a really extreme end of those who are committing self-injury and everything else, maybe it almost is a disease, actually. And maybe we shouldn't actually beat around the bush, maybe we should actually call it for what it is. I think maybe in some extreme cases autism can be a disease. For me it's not a disease, but it is a disorder. Yeah, definitely. There's nothing wrong with, that's what I mean, we just need to be honest. So it's unhealthy to define your essence through what are disorders. Although obviously our mental disorders are a big part of us, but they shouldn't ever become our defining identity. Obviously they're part of us, and obviously are therefore part of our identity. They cannot possibly not be, but to make our whole life around them, and to kind of where we almost think we're nothing but a disorder, that is unhealthy. And he says there's something disordered about a society in which legions of successful people have suddenly discovered their diagnosis, and despite those conditions never having impeded their marches up the ladder of meritocracy, are making conversation all about them. It's absurd and cruel. It's absurd and cruel, as everything becomes about people who have attended elite colleges and secured enviable jobs, commandeering a conversation that is ethically bound to consider the interests of those who never had that chance. Autism will become in time just another status marker. He says that autism and also mental illness, he also talks about mental illness as well, will both become an identity. They will become, it says mental illness and autism as identity is toxic and dehumanising. Because it just becomes a status. It's even loads of celebrities now are using it to essentially bolster their careers as well. It's really narcissistic. And he says there are personal benefits to identifying with disorders. For example, social benefits and professional. But only though for people who essentially aren't really afflicted anyway. And there are question marks as to whether they actually truly are autistic. So it reorients our attention from treatment towards vague notions of justice. But then he says for the truly disordered, whatever benefits such identification might appear to hold for them now will prove in time to be illusions. That's a bit like what I was saying about some people who genuinely are disabled claiming it's not a disability. I used to do that in my teenage years because I was under the illusion that disability was something bad and shameful. But again, obviously those who are truly disabled eventually can no longer pretend it isn't a disability because shit hits the fan and you realise that actually you can't ignore it anymore. So how do you proceed with the quest to turn mental illness, autism, etc. into a positive thing without inevitably privileging the narratives and interests of those whose illness or autism is least malign? How do you tell generations of young strivers that having mental illness or autism is cool and unique without alienating those who feel only afflicted and who never feel cool and unique? How do you normalise mental illness and autism without further marginalising those who are least normal? Because the more you normalise it, in some respects, you're further alienating those who can never be normal, who are so outside of the mainstream that it's just completely irrelevant, this discourse. How do you constantly insist that all things are the same thing, that there is some umbrella as neuroatypical, neurodiverse, under which all manner of people fall, without trivialising the struggles of the truly disabled by equating them to those living lives that are successful by any measure? So the way things are going, contemporary mental illness and autism discourse threatens the duty of the truly incapacitated, the very thing it claims to oppose, leaving them voiceless, ignored, unheard and alone. Because let's face it, whenever you read an autism article, it's always, I'm just different, I'm not wrong, just different, or like, it's not a disorder and stuff like that. That's what you read in everywhere. Like, those who really are disordered by it are never given a voice, like hardly ever. Very occasionally, it does happen, but hardly ever. And I guess those who are like really, really profound, who aren't even aware of all this, because they're so profound and locked into themselves that they don't even have self-awareness. At least they do have parents to look after them and stuff, but their parents, and also like, in a sense, they're so obviously disabled that no one can ignore them, but in a sense, it's their parents then who then have to face all of this, and that can be really hurtful for their parents and everything as well, who have to like every day look after them, being told it's only a difference or whatever. But for those like me who do have self-awareness, and we're somewhere like in the middle, like I said before, both extremely able in some areas but extremely disabled in others, sort of in that squeezed middle zone where we're both very impaired but very able, in a way, it's people like us that are most hurt by this narrative, both on a self-awareness, self-esteem issue, constantly being made to feel like we're failed autistics. Because that's the other thing, these really successful autistics often say how grateful they are to be diagnosed, because it makes them feel like at least they're a successful autistic, not a failed neurotypical. But I think they've got it all wrong, because some people just struggle with things. It doesn't make them a failure. I think that's a capitalist myth, that somehow you're a failure just because you're struggling in life. And they then go on about, oh, now they're successful autistic because they've got like careers and kids and stuff. What message does it send out though to people like me who will never achieve anything like that? It makes us feel like we're failed autistics. So basically, them emphasising the positives all the time, it basically ends up making people like me, it affects our self-esteem, but no one gives a crap about that, because no one gives a crap about autistics who are actually pretty disabled. No one gives a crap because it's never talked about. So yeah, I sort of feel like people like me in that squeezed middle are the most, like I said, because we're not so obviously disabled and so profound that like everyone can see your disability, and like people assume I'm similar to someone like got the same potential as some of these more successful autistics because I can come across just like them, I can speak like them. But actually I'm really impaired, but people don't see that because they just see the verbal, so it actually harms people like me, I'd say, the most actually. And that's why I guess it's very personal to me and very political. Voiceless, ignored, unheard and alone. That's why what I'm using his YouTube channel for, to make myself feel less alone, to get the message out there, to advocate from the other side, to use my verbal abilities to benefit. Because I'm in quite a rare, in a sense, privileged position that many impaired people don't have that ability. So I'm using the fact I have my foot in both camps, both very able and very disabled, to kind of like shine a light on the issues, because I am quite rare in that respect. A psychologist who assessed me said how rare it was, having a non-verbal IQ so low and yet so verbally high at the same time. So both gifted and intellectually disabled, all in the same, like what I mean is verbally extremely able, right, almost to the point of being gifted verbally, but non-verbally intellectually disabled because it's below 70. So she said not many people are like that. That is such an extreme split. Even in autism terms. So yeah, I literally have got my foot in both camps. So I can see, because I do have similar struggles on a non-verbal practical level to some people with a mild intellectual disability, but at the same time, I'm verbally superior. So it's like I can see both sides in that respect, if that makes sense. So I can use that strong verbal ability to shine a light on these issues, and that's what I'm trying to do for this YouTube channel. So when people respond by saying, well, I'm not talking about them, like you often hear people in the neurodiversity movement say, oh, we're not talking about people, who can't work and stuff or whatever. Freddie replies by saying, well, recite